Thank you all for coming. My presentation is about, well, as you can see, provisioning the Oracle database in the cloud. You'll be the first ones to test drive this new presentation, and I hope to give it a few times. So if you have any pointers for me to make it even better at the end, I'm happy to hear about it. A bit about me. I've forgotten that slide actually, so that is one of the first improvements. I'm Frits Hoogland. I'm from the Netherlands. I work for the Accenture Enkitech Group, and for the Accenture Enkitech Group I am in the track to enhance things, and what we typically do in the Accenture Enkitech Group is dive very deep into things to understand how stuff works, and as a result, when you know how stuff works, to help people using it. And one of the prominent things we're doing is the Oracle database and Exadata. What this is about automated install and automated maintenance of, in this case, the Oracle database. But if installing the Oracle database isn't your thing, and I just saw a lot of people raise their hands for doing work in Apex, what this is actually one of the basic principles of DevOps. And as DevOps, what you essentially are doing is that you program how your environment should look like instead of having someone work on a list and making it for you. So even as a developer, this might give you some idea about how probably a next wave of computing goes on, where we automate, where we fully automate installing the infrastructure, as opposed to just waiting until the infrastructure is ready and then start working on it. What I will be talking about is installing the Oracle database version 12.1 and apply a patch to it on Oracle Linux. And for that I'm using Ansible, and Ansible is the primary automation tool. And what I actually will be doing mostly is show you how the Ansible playbooks, which is how you essentially program Ansible, works. And the prominent thing I want to show you is how very much easy it is to read. It's so easy to read actually that if you put in at the name tag for a specific task in a playbook, if you explain what is going on, you can really give this to an auditor to say, this is how I built my host. You tell me if this is correct or not. I think it's that clearly to read, but I'll leave that up to you because I'll be showing that to you. And for that, I have clouds in my title, but what I actually will be doing is running it on my laptop. And this is how it looks like. This is what it means to depict my laptop. And what I'll be using is a tool called Vagrant. And using Vagrant, I actually will just be talking to VirtualBox. So if you have troubles setting up your environment on your laptop in an automated way, this is worth checking. Vagrant, and Vagrant simply uses VirtualBox. And using VirtualBox, I'll be having a CentOS host which runs Ansible and RUNDECK. And then I have two hosts on which I will install the Oracle database. And these Oracle database hosts are instrumented via RUNDECK, and actually I have RUNDECK go back to my laptop originally, and on my laptop it will instruct Vagrant to do stuff. And at the end, what I also use, to be absolutely clear about all the components I use NGINX, which is a web server, and I use it for staging a YUM repository. And a YUM repository is used for the machines to fetch RPM packages and install them. So, in your company, how long does it take before you've got a fully patched version of the Oracle software installed? What is a typical time? Well, if you work for a client, at a certain point in time, you need to build a database. A couple of years. But it's generally a painful operation, right? And it's it's hard to get, and it's quite easy to get it wrong because different people need to install it. They need to work off a task list, and using this task list, it's quite easy to do it wrong, and even in the database to install the wrong options. I will be using Ansible, and what Ansible does, how it works, is essentially you describe how you want a state of a computer system to be like. And it's not really a program language, and another very important thing is anything you define should be rerunnable. So if you run it again, it shouldn't give an error. It should just say, okay, that's already done, so I skip it. And you will see that in a little while. And if it truly does something, it says, okay, if it finished it. In the past, I used SEMAPHORE, and SEMAPHORE is a tool which sits on top of Ansible as a server, and it pulls the Ansible scripts from a repository and then runs Ansible from the repository for you. But nowadays, I use RUNDECK, and RUNDECK is a little more flexible because it also allows you to execute shell scripts and not exclusively use run Ansible. And as you've seen, if you are interested in it, I've got a link here. You can download the presentation later. I've got a link here which describes how to install it if you find it interesting, and the same here is for RUNDECK. And why should you use such a product in the first place? Well, as I said, if you start thinking along a way DevOps works, you get a way more predictable installation if you automate the entire installation, as opposed to having someone run something for you from a task list, which is done manually. Because people are, and probably most of you know that or have seen it, people are very terrible on working things in a long task list, especially if they do not exactly understand the steps. Then it's extremely easy to make mistakes. But also accountability. If you're working in a bigger company and somebody made a change, it's quite nice if you later can find back who made the change in the first place. And maybe you want to integrate it using REST. All the DevOps-like tools, and that includes SEMAPHORE and Ansible, have a REST interface, so you can, if you have other components which are REST-enabled, you can talk to it and just make it do things for you, and you don't even have to log on, like I do. And think about it. If you are a DBA, or if you are looking after DBAs, it's quite weird that in the current state of IT, you're in a corporate environment, maybe of a bank. I'm currently working in a bank, that's why I give the example, but also retailers or whatever. And that people, if something comes up in a ticketing system, that a DBA or somebody, a level 1 support person, goes in and essentially does things on his own without you even telling, or anyone else in his team telling, and just fix it for you, for which nobody knows how it's actually fixed. This is how actually, and as a troubleshooter, I see this on a daily basis. This is how, even if database servers are fully installed in a standard way, slowly morph from being standardized because people change stuff because Oracle support tells them. People change stuff because they think this is the best way of doing it. And maybe it is the best way of doing for this certain database, but if there are multiple databases and somebody starts changing SQL net parameters because that is good for his database, this on its term might affect other databases. And that's not a problem, but most of the time nobody knows what's truly going on if a DBA starts making changes. And if you create scripts for it, because if you encounter something on one database, it's almost guaranteed to happen at other databases too, you can create scripts for it. But it requires you to think in a different way. As I said, the cloud provisioning examples is not really provisioning in the cloud, and still at conferences, Wi-Fi is, well, can be a challenge. I'm not saying it is here, I didn't even try it, but I'm doing it on my laptop. And you can do this too. If you want to do stuff in the cloud, where you should look at, if you are going to do mass deployments of virtual machines for a project, at a tool called Terraform. I'll not be doing any Terraform here, but Terraform is a way that you can describe how your cloud layout should look like for multiple hosts, and you can define it, and it will then create it for you in, for example, Oracle Cloud, but it obviously also does Amazon AWS. And Ansible cannot really work with Windows as the control machine. So that's another thing. If you want to run Ansible, you should run it on a Unix system, essentially. So it's not strictly Linux, it's strictly not Windows. And then Vagrant. If I start provisioning, in this case, my RUNDECK machine, this is how the provisioning of a virtual machine in RUNDECK looks like. I create a directory rundeck-v for Vagrant, and then I VA a file, and this is how the file looks like. And essentially what I'm doing in the file is I say something about my private key, and I need to do that because my USB drive doesn't get the writes correct, so I need to, and in order to use a private key, it needs to have the writes 400, so read only for my current user, and the SSD drive doesn't do that, so that's why I put the private key path here. And really all I do is say I need a box CentOS 7, so I define the box type, I give it a name, and I give it an IP address, and then specifically for VirtualBox I say the name is RUNDECK and I have so much memory, so much CPUs. Think about it. I don't know how you, if you don't already use such a tool like this, how you created a virtual machine, but it's rather convenient to have this script. You can copy the script, give it a different name, put it in a different directory, and then you can redo it. It will pull an image with CentOS 7, and it will configure it for you with the IP addresses. And I have created my machines. RUNDECK MM stands for multiple machines. These are the machines I will be installing Oracle on. And I'm doing more or less the same, only I use a little loop to create two machines. So I create an array with host name, and IP address, and I'm essentially doing the same, but for two machines to install Oracle on. This is how it works essentially. If you use a box from Vagrant, it will have a default username Vagrant, a default user Vagrant in the virtual machine, and it is set up for certificate-based authentication. So if you then take the default private key, you can log on using it, and it has also, you can use a password because Vagrant is meant for local usage. In the cloud you shouldn't have a default password, obviously, because it potentially can be accessed by the entire world. And the password is Vagrant for the Vagrant user, as you might have guessed already. And if you want to know how this works in Linux, because you log on as a certain user, and then as this user you're going to do things, so you probably want to become root or whatever, it uses sudo, and this is the line in sudo which defines that once you've logged on as the Vagrant user, you can become root, or you can create an Oracle user and then sudo to the Oracle user. Sudo to the Oracle user. This is how it's done. If you are on the Oracle Cloud, maybe some of you, essentially that's the same, but then you use a user called OPC, Oracle Public Cloud. I'm using a YUM repository. Is it hard to create your own YUM repository? Or the question should be, why should I use a YUM repository in the first place? Well, if you have a group of machines, you want them all to be installed exactly the same and using the same versions. And the YUM repositories from Red Hat 2 and from Oracle will update their versions. And so what if you are seriously thinking about this and you have multiple machines set up and you want to update them periodically within a certain interval, This is how you create your own YUM repository. So it's actually really, really easy. You set up a web server to serve a certain location, dash repo, and it's shown in the root. And then you install some YUM tools, YUM utils, and create repo, and then you use repo sync, create repo. That's all. It requires you to have a YUM setup defined to a certain YUM server in the first place, and that is what is repository definition name. That's you pull in, and it will just download all the packages for you, creating your own YUM server, which is then frozen in time until you run repo sync again. But you should then obviously create another directory if you want to do this on another time and update the packages and create another one, move the YUM repository definition on the hosts to this new one, and then update them. So this is how you do it. Update with a certain interval. This is. Now let me show you how. I'm not sure how handy this is. I'll now will try to do an install of the Oracle database software live whilst I show how I'm doing it. And once I've installed the Oracle database software, I'm not creating a database, but that is really just something which takes a lot of time. I'll then update the PSU patch. I then update the apply the OJVM patch. And once I've done that, I will create a tar file from it, transfer it to my control host. I'll wipe the machines and then put the tarball on it and clone the tarball in place. And I'll try to do that within the end of this presentation. And I'll do that by running do everything. Let's see how that works. And it fails. That's nice. Live demos, you gotta love it. This is, well, this is not sure if I can fix this quite well. Then what I'll do is I can show you in the past it has an average time of doing it in 34 minutes, but this is a pity. But this is actually how it looks like. I run something which is called deploy, and Ansible playbooks contain multiple plays. And if you want to set up a Linux host, the first thing you do is set up Linux in the first place. So you download a default template, and what I do is set up Linux, and it is for all hosts, and I declare some variables, and these are my repositories, Oracle Linux 7 Update 3 and UAK, and my repository host, and I specify a specific kernel. If you are doing Linux installations, you should specifically specify the kernel. And the roles it's executing is, it will set the repositories correct, so it points to the correct repositories, then sets the kernel, and then does the Oracle specific setups. Oracle requires you to install some additional packages, and I set up the U01 file system for Oracle. And this is how the repository handling looks like. And I replace all my repositories, my file public yum Oracle Linux 7.repo, I replace enabled equals 1 with enabled equals 0. So this way I disable all the repositories in the file public yum OL7, which on an Oracle Linux host already exists. And then what I do, and this looks a bit weird, but I've got two items, which are the two repository names. One of them is the Unbreakable Enterprise kernel one, and the other one is the general repository. And I give them the name of the repository, and a description which is exactly the same. The repository host is the same in both cases, and the URL is the name again. So just as a reminder, that's quite simply the names are Oracle Linux 7 Update 3 and Oracle Linux 7 UAK 4. So this way I defined two distinct YUM named repositories. That's all. That's very simple, and I just define it. I don't program it. I don't do a lot of stuff with moving files in and defining lines. I just define them using the YUM repository module in Ansible. And then set up the kernel. I first use the YUM provided for saying, okay, I want a name contains the full name in the YUM repository, and I say this package needs to be present. Once again, this is really simple, I think, and then we need to do something in order to set the desired the kernel I just installed as the default kernel. And well, there is not an Ansible module for it, so I use a shell command, and that you use and the shell command uses grubby, and it sets the default kernel using -- set default. And then using grubby again, I can see if the default kernel equals uname -r is the kernel version currently running, and I'm looking if it's the same as the default kernel. So if the running kernel is not the one we previously installed and made default, and I'm using again a shell if command to say if current kernel is the same as the default kernel, then it says yes. Is the running kernel the default kernel? Yes. And otherwise I'll say no. And it registers a runtime variable called remain running. And then what I do is I say I reboot to activate the kernel, and this entire block is run when no is in remain running. So if my current kernel is not the running kernel, this block is executed. And this block, what does this block do? It first says, it sleeps 2 seconds and it says shut down now, and it applies the tag. This is what you see in file log messages, Ansible activate new kernel. And it does it asynchronously, which means it executes this command, but it immediately continues executing Ansible commands. The next thing is I do a local action. So this is not executed on the machine, but is executed on my control machine. And it is the wait for action. And it looks on port 22, the SSH port, to see if the state is stopped. So what I'm doing is, on all the machines in my, which I currently try instrumenting, I execute shutdown, but wait for 2 seconds, and then I move on. And I start looking at port 22 of all the machines in which I currently try to install it on, and I watch on port 22 for them, for the state stopped, so for SSH to go down. And once this is executed, I'll start looking at port 22 for port 22 to come up. So what this does is it installs a new version of the kernel, if it should do it, only if it should do it, and then it reboots the server for you. In most environments, rebooting a server even is very hard to do, and it's actually hard to program to reboot servers. So this is, I think, brilliant if you need to install a new kernel on 40 servers, because this does it all for you. And then we move on. I like to install the latest version of packages if I am installing Oracle on a new system. And this is how I do it. I say yum for name star state latest. That's really easy. Oh, and by the way, I just installed a specific version of the kernel there might be a newer version, so I exclude anything kernel related. And then I am going to use the Oracle pre-install package, but the Oracle pre-install package lacks some packages which you still need, which are or have been in the past. I added some of the packages because I got bitten by it. Unzip is the most famous one. I think in the very latest version of the Oracle pre-install package, Oracle finally included Unzip, but in the past you had to unzip the Oracle software, but it wasn't in the pre-install package. So Unzip, sometimes you need ACL, you need Perl, and in certain cases you need Unix ODBC as a package. This way you just say, I've got 4 items, yum, name, item, state installed. This is how you install it. This is so, once again, it's clear what it does and it's so easy to do. Then there is SE Linux, Security Enhanced Linux, and it disallows a lot of stuff. And essentially, well, I had an interesting Twitter conversation because I tweeted about it, that you should deinstall it. And if anybody tried running Linux, tried running the Oracle database on Linux with SE Linux on, and apparently with the latest versions, it's fully supported to have it on. However, it's never been that way, and I don't think anybody is actually doing it in production. So I'm still not buying it, so I just disable it. And then I install the Oracle pre-install package. And what this does is I put my own public key in the authorized, this is the authorized key module. I put my own authorized key in the in the known host file of Oracle, so I can log on using my SSH key instead of having to type a password. Once again, I hope you now see how easy it is to define how your system should look like, and it's more in human readable form than using a shell script. Because I don't know about you, but a lot of times when I go into a client site and things are behaving weird and I start looking into scripts which are run via cron, and then I ask, what does this script do? Because it seems to be on the same time that we're having these problems. And then people say, well, the previous DBA put it there and it runs and nobody complains up until this problem we have, but we actually don't know what it does. And shell scripts are reasonably easy to program in such a way that it's absolutely not understandable what's happening. The only language I know which can make it worse is Perl. Perl is brilliant, but the readability is often limited to the creator. And here another example. I don't know how many of you truly install databases, but I like to use logical volume management because you're then are bound by partitions. But this is how you do logical volume management in 2 pages. You say, for the logical volume management, I want to create a volume group, VG Oracle, from the physical volume dev SDB, and in my virtual machine, I know that my added disk is called dev SDB. That's a given. You have to know how to put it in a volume group. But I say I create a volume group Oracle from a physical volume dev SDB, and then I create a logical volume LV Oracle from the volume group Oracle with a certain size. I then create a file system on it and I mount it. This is, again, so easy, and the reason I've got another page is, as the last thing, I said the ownership to Oracle for my U01 file system. This is so easy and it's fully understandable what's happening. If you want to change this, if you want to increase the size of the file system to 40 gig, it's changeable for everyone. It's really, really easy. Then the Oracle installation and patching. This is the play. I install Oracle, then you need to install OPATCH, a new version of OPATCH. That's quite a famous stuff. And then I patch the PSU and I patch the JVM. And this is how it looks like. I first execute the grep on the inventory, And this is the default place of the inventory, and I look for my database inventory name. Because I'm going to install and give my database a specific name in the inventory, I know where to look for. So using this grep, I can see if my home is already installed. Because remember what I said when I started. The script should be rerunnable. I should be able to run this entire playbook against a home which is fully installed, and it should just say OK everywhere because it's already done. So only, and the block has a when, and the when, this is one of three. The when is when database home installed, the return code is not 0 or it says skipped. Only then this block is executed, and the execution block is I create a directory, I then synchronize the two patch files for the installation of the database, I unzip them, I then execute run installer to install them. And by the way, you don't need a template for installing the database software. You can put the options in the template just on the line. And it looks a bit messy now, but it's really convenient. You can just put all the relevant things in the template on the command line. You can fully install it using a single command line. You can install the Oracle database. And by default, the shell module of Ansible checks for the return code. If the return code isn't 0, it will stop and error out. But additionally, I say, OK, I register database install, and this is also failed when the installation of Oracle Database 12c was successful, is not in the standard out of this output. It's exactly the same checks you would do if you were installing it. Then you run aura inst root. This output of database install will say that you aura inst root must be run. That's always if the first Oracle product requires you to run aura inst root, and it is in this output. So if aura inst root is in this output, it will aura inst root for you. Then root sh must also be run, and then I clean up the stage directory. Once again, all the steps, but then if you just written out in a way that you can actually understand them, and this is how you very easily can install the database. And then run the patching. Patching is quite often just hard, and realize that we just did a fresh install of the Oracle database, so the patching should be easy now, and I didn't create a database. But essentially the steps are very much the same as you saw for installing the database. I create a directory, transfer the patch file, I unzip the patch, and then I fetch the Oracle 12.1 homes in the case that I have multiple homes. And then for all the homes, I do a little trick here. This is a small shell script. I say if the OPATCH version in the homes, item contains homes, and I take the first line, head-1. If does not equal stage directory OPATCH, which I just unzipped, and the version from that. So if these are not the same, I first move the current OPATCH in the database home to OPATCH and then a date added to it, and then unzip the file into the Oracle home. This is how you install OPATCH. And then I clean up the directory. And now with the patching, for the patching, in order to make it rerunnable and in order to be able to have multiple patches, I create a variable file, PSU patch number, PSU patch file, success line. And mind you, the success line on different versions of Oracle is different. I've got a full project where I can install a lot of versions of the Oracle database, and I'm really appalled by the fact that if you go to a new version, that then the messages for installation are just plain different. Going from 11, it's not only a change. First they say the Oracle database was successfully installed, and then in 12 it's successfully installed. It's an entirely different line, as if a different team is creating it. But essentially the steps here, well, not exactly the same. I first Again, scripts need to be rerunnable. I first run OPATCH ls patches to pick the patches applied to the current home, and then I create a block. And essentially I say when PSU patch number is not on Oracle Home Patches standard out. So if the patch number is not in ls patches, this block is executed. And you probably recognize the structure because you'll do a lot of the same. I create a directory, transfer the patch file, unzip the patch, you'll see, and then I apply the patch. And the applying of the patch is the unique part here. And after the patch is successful, it cleans up the directory. JVM patch, well, you probably see it's exactly the same. I created some variables. I run ls patches to see if the patch is available, and that's in the when. And if it's not available, which means the patch is not applied, I apply it using create a directory, transfer the patch, unzip the patch, apply the patch, and then clean up the directory. It's the same procedure, only for a different patch, essentially. Then cloning a home. If you're doing automated installs, this is something you really should be given some thoughts about, because you then can have a home. If you apply these patches, you can have a home with the patches applied, which you essentially, well, if you're old like me, like I did in the old days with Oracle 7 and Oracle 8, what we did in the past was zip or tar a home, save it on a stage directory, and then if you needed to install a new database, if you needed to install Oracle on a new database, you just picked the tarball, unzipped it, and then said, okay, there you are. But with, I think it was Oracle 9, they introduced a binary repository, and the patches look in this repository, so they disable that path for you. And I believe since Oracle 11, there is the aura-inst clone option, which essentially allows you to do the same, and that's this method. Because you run clone.pl, and you unzip an Oracle home, and then essentially you run clone.pl, which generates the inventory metadata for you in the inventory, so it allows you to just unzip a full install, essentially, and then have the Oracle database home. So, and obviously that's a way shorter install time than fully installing a database, have the Aura installer run, and then apply all the patches. And there are also disadvantages, obviously. You need to store the archive somewhere, and the installation of the Oracle database is quite bulky. And if you have new patches, you need to make a new tarball of the newly patched home. This is the play, and I'm only using one role for doing it. Well, how would it look like? I create a directory. This is creating the clone of the home. I create a stage directory, and then I run a tar command to just tar up the database home, and then the synchronize command puts it in my local directory, and then I remove the directory. This is how you create a clone. It's very easy. And you use this typically if you install a new version of the patch in the database home to actually fetch a clone of a new version. And this is how the play for the installation looks like. I've got some variables here, and I use one role, install Oracle 12.102 via clone. Yep, nearly done. And this is how it looks like. I'm checking the inventory to see if my clone home is already installed. And if not, I run this block, and this block, you will now probably recognize it. I create a directory for the installation, transfer the file, unzip the tarball, and the tarball will now unzip a full database home. And then you run clone.pl to clone the database. After the clone, I have to verify if I need to run aura-inst.root, aura-inst root.sh, run root.sh, and then clean up the directory. This is how it's done. So what I hoped to show you here is that if you think in this, well, probably for a lot of companies, new paradigm, maybe some of you are doing something partially already this, but I truly believe this is a way of working which for all the DBAs in this audience is mandatory to start thinking about. And if I speak in the words of Peter Visser, which was in, I think, in Romania in one of the previous conferences, if you do not do DevOps, DevOps does you, which essentially just means if you're not adopting to this way, then somebody else, and probably a script, will do your work for you in the future. So if you're a DBA, I don't even think it's that you can just ignore it, because otherwise you'll be out of a job, because these things need to be truly automated. Any reactions or questions on this subject, or did I beat you to death with dozens of playbooks? Yes?
I was thinking when you use Vagrant with VirtualBox, what advantages do you see over using Docker image and using Dockerfile to build?
Docker, that's an interesting one, and I actually created a Docker file for installing the database myself. I created the first one that I know of, which had a persistent data part for the database, because the Oracle ones would remove, on stopping the Docker image, would also remove the data files, which I found rather silly, because the whole purpose of a database is keeping data for you, not removing it. And Docker solves a problem for which I think the problem is to very quickly instantiate systems which have a small footprint, which can be easily started up. And as a result, as far as I currently understand Docker, is you have to do the last part of the install, because that's the way Docker works. It works based upon previous versions of install images. And I don't think it's in real world usable to have your Oracle image be reinstalled for you, which is quite a bulky install, anytime you want to start up your database. So I fully understand it, because if your whole way of working for microservices and other things is creating these Docker images, then it's really convenient, and you can almost effortlessly scale up. But for the database is a totally different use case, which I think, and from what I've seen, is not the typical use case for Docker. But again, I fully understand that if your whole environment is containerized, that you might just say, well, we just do it this way too, because that fits best in our environment. But currently, I don't see Docker as a very good use case for using it with the Oracle database. But it's a very good question. And again, I can say, based upon what I've seen and my experiences, and it's still one of my #1 articles on my blog. A lot of people are reading it, but still I'm thinking, I don't think that it's a really good use case. Okay, no further questions? Thank you.